everybody. Good evening, and thank you for joining us on a Monday evening. We are so happy that you can make it because we are well aware just how busy and overwhelming the day can be. So we respect that and we're grateful for that. Just a few housekeeping items before we get going. We are going to be using a chat feature to communicate. Depending on your screen and what you have access to, you'll find that at the bottom. I will be posting some messages throughout the presentation in our chat window, so it'll pop up for you and you'll see. And you can chat with me privately. I'm listed as Maria Rosa, and I will ensure that if it's something that needs to be shared with the presenter, that she will receive your message. We want you to feel safe and supported here this evening, so please note that we have a crisis line available, as well as Rock's access line should you have any questions about their services, either during this presentation or afterwards. Usually we have a question and discussion period at the very end. This is a two-part series that you're attending. This is part one. This is the information piece, where our presenter will be sharing with you all of her insights, experiences, and expertise. And then our part two, which we will not be recording, will be for general information that you'd like to share about yourself, your family. Perhaps you have questions, you've had some time to process what you've learned tonight. Maybe you've got something that you'd like to share at the next meeting. So please do join us back. I will be sending out an email along with another link for that evening. If you are registered for this evening, you are automatically registered for next week, so you do not need to re-register, and I will send that to you. So our question and answer period is going to be sort of deferred until the next session, which is Monday, November 2nd. Saying that, if you have a burning question, something that comes up that you absolutely would like to have addressed this evening, please send that through the chat, and I will ensure to discuss that at the very end of the presentation. I will be posting a welcome in the chat as well as a survey link for you. There are two survey links that we ask, if you don't mind. One is our own personal survey link, which is we like to know what your thoughts are and what you'd like to see more of. And the other is from Trillium, and they'd like to know, as our funder, just how you're feeling about everything we're doing. So they are two separate surveys for two separate purposes, and we apologize that we survey you to death, but it truly does help us to understand what you need better as our families and as our community. So I would like to share with you a brief acknowledgement. We like to acknowledge our land. We are honored to welcome you this evening. Take a moment right now to allow yourself to truly and fully arrive. Allow the dust to settle in your mind, and please bring your attention to your body, your breath, and this present moment. You have arrived, and welcome. We would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on Aboriginal land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the beginning. As settlers, we're grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Long before today, as we gather here, there have been Aboriginal peoples who have been the stewards of this place. In particular, we acknowledge the traditional territory of the Neutral, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this place. We also recognize the contribution of the Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples have made, both in shaping and strengthening this community in particular, and our province and country as a whole. Thank you for acknowledging that with me. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce my co-facilitator for the evening, Christina.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for registering for this workshop with us this evening. My name is Christina, and I'm a student volunteer at Halton Family for Families. Halton Family for Families is a community collaborative that is here to support you and your family. We are volunteer parents and caregivers who partner with community organizations to organize events, workshops, and socials where you can connect with other families and feel supported and comfortable as a family. Please also feel free to check out our website, www.haltonfamilyforfamilies.com. I'd like to introduce our workshop, Learning Disabilities. What are they? What should I do? Where do I get help? Tonight is part one of a two-part series. Our presenter this evening is Allison Brindle. Allison has a unique perspective to offer as the parent of a child with an LD and mental health issues. After her daughter's initial diagnosis with learning disabilities, anxiety, and ADHD, Allison studied as an applied learning disability strategist, academic coach, and mindfulness instructor to support her family. She is now the executive director of the Learning Disabilities Association of Halton-Hamilton and is committed to building an organization to assist as many people as possible. Allison is here to introduce us to what learning disabilities are and what they feel like for the child. This presentation is designed to help us build empathy and understanding for those who face the challenge of a learning disability every day and develop collaborative skills to help ensure effective advocacy for your child. We welcome you and are very happy to have you present on this interesting topic.
Thank you very much. As mentioned, my name is Allison Brindle, and I am the Executive Director of the Learning Disabilities Association of Halton-Hamilton. I've been in this role for about 6 months now, basically since COVID hit. And prior to that, I was the president of the organization. So I have about 4 or 5 years experience with this organization. And as was mentioned, I have a unique perspective as the parent of a child with a learning disability. So I am passionate about making sure that others have the knowledge and experience that they need to support our children and help them achieve their full potential. So in this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about who LDAHH is. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about the organization, and then we're going to move into what learning disabilities or LDs actually are. And I've got some simulations so we can find out a little bit about what they feel like. It's all very well to understand the science behind them, but it's completely different to experience life with a learning disability. We're then going to go on to how to advocate for our children and what supports the school boards have to provide. And finally, I'm going to finish up with how LDAHH can help. So if you're struggling, if you need further information, we're going to cover a little bit about the services that we provide and what we can do to help you. So without much ado, we are going to talk about LDAHH. So the Learning Disabilities Association has been in existence in Halton for approximately 50 years and has been in serving Hamilton for almost 3. We recently reviewed our strategic plan and we slightly changed our mission and vision. Our mission now is much simpler. Our mission is to provide advocacy, education, and services for individuals with learning disabilities to empower them to reach their full potential. We want to make sure that individuals with LDs understand about their own diagnoses and have the tools that they need for themselves to be successful and independent. And our vision is basically is a world where we are not needed, where individuals with learning disabilities are included, empowered, and celebrated for who they are. We're not there yet, but with everything that we do, we try to work towards that vision. So learning disabilities and our organization. Who do we represent? And I'm assuming here, and it may be a big assumption, that the majority of people on this call have some experience with a learning disability. About 1 in 10 Canadian children has a learning disability. It could be between 7 and 10%, somewhere around about there. And if we look at this chart, the area that is this light blue color is the learning disabilities within a spectrum of all the different types of disabilities that there are. in a school setting. So learning disabilities makes up about 43% of students with disabilities or who needs special support in a learning environment. When we add in ADHD, which is a medical diagnosis, that goes up to over 50%, so about 56%. So we are by far the largest population of parents, individuals, students within the school system. We represent our students as members of the special education advisory committees and the local school boards, and we speak with one of the largest voices of members behind us. So trying to make sure that the needs of our students are given the weighting that it deserves. So very, very common learning disabilities, but what are they? There's a misconception, and it comes by the name. Learning disabilities, and having come from the UK, learning disabilities in the UK is something very, very different than it is here in Canada. So learning disabilities is a brain disorder that affects a person's ability to learn and use academic and other skills. To be diagnosed with a learning disability, you have to have intelligence of average to gifted levels. So you need to be above average intelligence, but be failing to achieve that potential in a school setting, in an academic setting, or only be achieving that academic level by putting in huge amounts of effort. So what we generally see is that children with an LD may be getting low marks at school. Maybe the teacher thinks they're just being lazy because they can tell that they're bright, but they're not delivering the work level that the teacher assumes of them. Or the parents might feel that. Or it could be a situation where, like my daughter, she does reasonably well at school, but it's 4 hours of homework every night when everybody else is only doing 1 hour. So there's two different ways in which you can be diagnosed. Intelligence that's not seen at an academic level, or an academic level that's only sustainable by a disproportionate amount of work. But whatever happens, students with a learning disability have to be of average to gifted intelligence. And so if we look at that on a bell chart, we are seeing that learning disabilities are here in this range. The problem that comes with the name is that most people think that a learning disability is the same thing as an intellectual disability, which would be down in this range. Okay, and so often the myths that take hold of learning disabilities is that our children are not capable of learning, and absolutely nothing could be further from the truth. Our children are very, very capable of learning if they're taught in the right way. So Einstein had a learning disability. He was dyslexic, one of the brightest people ever, and but struggled to write. We would never say that he had a low intelligence. And so he's an example of somebody with a learning disability. Again, very, very bright, but not able to show that in a specific area of academia. So again, your child could be down here at the average level, but be performing way down here. Or your child could be way up here in the gifted level, but be performing down here, which in many schools would be considered okay, not really a problem. And that's why many of our children fail to get a diagnosis. Because if they're really up at the gifted level and they're performing at above average, decent level, maybe a B level, they're the children that get left behind. It's not serious enough to do anything about. It's only if the parents push to determine a diagnosis that we find out that these children actually have more potential. So we often talk about learning disabilities being an invisible disability, where our children have a lot more potential than they're given credit for and are given learnings for. So learning disabilities affect pretty much every area of life for a person with an LD. They can affect oral language, speaking, listening, understanding, how people read, write, do maths, even social interactions can all be affected by the skills that are disrupted in a learning disability. And there are 7 basic processes, psychological processes going on in the brain that can possibly be deficits in a child with a learning disability. The most common one is something called phonological processing. And I'm not going to go into these in too much detail. We're not here for a psychology lesson. It's just to give you a little bit of an overview about how all of these areas are interlinked and how a child with a deficit in one area, it can affect multiple skills. And if you have multiple learning disabilities, how it can affect pretty much everything in your life. So phonological processing is the ability to understand and hear that different sounds can be associated with different letters. So this is an absolutely critical part of learning to read. We assume that with learning to read, you just have to learn the letters, that it makes a sound, and you put it all together. But with a child with phonological processing deficits, they actually can't tell the difference between, say, a B and a K sound. For them, it's the same. And so it's not a hearing problem. If you take them for a hearing test, the hearing is perfectly fine. It's a processing deficit in the brain. And the brain is incapable of determining the difference in the sound. And if you can't distinguish between B and K, when you put it with the sound at the end, you can't distinguish between bat and cat. And therefore, you can't learn that one of them represents a flying animal and one of them is a furry animal. And so reading becomes very, very difficult. And this affects about 80% of students with a learning disability have some form of language-based LD or dyslexia. Another key area is memory and attention. So a lot of children may struggle with their working memory. So memory is a very complex process where you take in information, you have to decide, in the brain, they have to decide where to store it. If you want it back, you have to be able to retrieve it, retrieve the right piece of information, put it into your working memory, do something with it, and then produce some kind of output. Any one of those steps can go wrong in memory. And so what we often find with students with a learning disability is they may learn something and have grasped it by the end of the teaching day, but the next morning, it's kind of all gone again. And so every day is relearning the same thing over and over again. The processing speed is very, very common. Processing speed deficits are very common in students with learning disabilities because there are so many things that can go wrong. The ability to pull it all together and actually work out what needs to take place in an academic activity is very difficult, and therefore it's much slower. One of the problems with this is that in a social setting, we communicate very rapidly. And so if you're having a conversation or there's a classroom full of children and one of those children has a processing speed deficit, the conversation will have moved on before the child has processed what is actually happening. And so they may be asked a question, fail to answer it because they're still processing it. The teacher moves on, and then 2 or 3 minutes later, they suddenly shout out the answer, by which time everybody's annoyed with them because the lesson has already moved on and they don't understand why the child is still trying to respond to the last question that was asked. And again, this is all due to the processing speed. Language processing is the ability to understand and articulate language oral language. So in situations like this, an individual, we may be having a conversation, or I may be talking to you now, and when I mention the word learning disability, your brain may process that as something completely different, perhaps banana. So that every time that I speak and I mention learning disability, your brain is saying to you, banana. And so you have absolutely no comprehension of what I'm talking about. And on the flip side, your brain could be doing the same thing when you're trying to retrieve words. So you may be talking about the struggles that your child has, and every time you mention child, the word dog comes up. And again, other people have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. So language processing is a very difficult learning disability to deal with. It often leads to a lot of social isolation, but again, is all down to the processing in the brain. Perceptual motor processing is, or visual motor processing. This is often the child who's seen as the goofball in the class. They fall off their chair, maybe they're terrible at sports, they can't ride a bike. And really this is down to the fact that their brain cannot process the visual information about where they are or where parts of their body are in relation to other objects or to where they want to be. So when they go to sit down, they haven't processed visually where the chair is versus where their body is, and their muscles are doing something that is out of whack with the visual stimulus, and so they fall off the chair. Again, it is not a visual eye deficit. It's not going to be fixed by glasses. It is processing that's going on in the brain. Visual spatial processing is kind of an even broader element of this, which is where children basically just have a problem processing any visual information. And so this is the format that my daughter has. And she can go to places that she's been to multiple times, but doesn't process the visual cues of where she is. So she can't find her way around school very easily because nothing looks familiar. She's constantly lost. And with that comes anxiety because she never knows where she is. If I asked her to explain how she would get to the local Fortinos, she would struggle because she wouldn't be able to come up with any of the landmarks that we map our world with. This also has a problem when it comes to math. A lot of math is visual based. You have to picture what's happening in the problem. Reading comprehension, you have to visualize what's going on in the story, is generally how we work out what's happening in the story. And also in social and emotional situations. 97% of our communication is nonverbal, either body language, tone of voice, those kind of things. And so if you fail to understand the visual cues that other people are giving you, you don't know when they're upset with you. And so you often do things that upset other people. And then finally, we have the executive functions, which are the higher level, higher order functions, like planning, being able to organize time, being able to organize activities, being able to sort out which order you would do things in to be able to do it most effectively. These are generally not developed in an adult until they're about 25. With children or individuals with a learning disability, that might not be until 35. And when they look at the brains of individuals with ADHD, which obviously is very similar and about 70% of our children suffer from, the executive functioning part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, grows more slowly and is actually smaller than in quotation marks, normal children. So these children will never have the full executive functioning capacity that others may have. And so they need to develop and learn to use tools that will help them be better with executive functioning. So as you can see, there's 7 things going on here, but they control a huge amount of what goes on in a person's life and in school. So perhaps you have a memory and attention problem. Okay, so you read a story. By the end of the story, you can't really remember what was happening at the beginning of the story. So that's affecting your reading, your writing now, because you don't want to write. You probably have some processing speed there, so it takes you longer, which means that it's easier for you to forget because you've got a longer time span to forget things. You're having to do more work because you can get less of it done in class. Concepts don't make as much sense because you can't build on them as much, because what you learned yesterday cannot be translated and be relied upon to be there the next day. So just using that one example, we can see how this affects all different types of activities that go on in school. And again, one of the biggest things is the social emotional part. With any one of these learning disabilities, we find that children are seen and perceived as different. And we all know that as human beings, we're harsh, and that difference is not always accepted. And so that we find that many of our students suffer and find it difficult to make friends and keep friends. What I wanted to do today is just give you a very brief overview, and it's there's lots of simulations on understood.org. And if you want to, it's a site out of the States, and if you want to spend some time looking at whatever the LD your child has, I really, really do recommend it. But I just wanted to take a brief overview of make you feel a little bit what it's like to have a learning disability. So I'm going to do one of the simulations, and I'm going to do the reading simulation. Okay, if I can. No, I can't. Okay, it's because I'm sharing the screen already. So what I would suggest you do is you go to understood.org and you go through the simulations, okay, with whatever is the most relevant learning disability for you. Because in there you really get an understanding of what it feels like, what the pressure is as you fail to achieve the tasks that have been set up. I say my daughter has ADHD, and until I did the simulation on attention, I had absolutely no idea why she couldn't pay attention to me. Going through the simulation and the amount of extra noise that a person with ADHD will pick up and will block out what you're trying to speak to them is absolutely mind-blowing. And it really gives you an insight into what a child is going through. So at our latest conference last year, we had one of the doctors from Burlington who was speaking about her journey with ADHD. And she was saying that when she was doing her medical exam, there was a clock on the wall that was ticking. And of course, nobody else could hear it. But for her, it got so infuriating that she could not answer a single question until they took that clock out of the room, because that was all she could focus on. So I do recommend you do the simulations. I do have one here that doesn't require me to go to another site. So this is kind of what it's like to have a visual perception difficulty. So I don't know what you can see here. Is there anything in the chat? Can anybody put in the chat what they can see here? Is there anything that anybody sees? So Maria, do you have anything that's coming up? Can anybody see anything? Okay. Well, I'm going to show you what this image is, because it's, to me,
Sorry to interrupt you. I've got a couple that are just coming in.
Okay, great.
I've got maybe a fence, just black
Okay.
and white, an
Yep.
arm thumb up,
an arm, thumb up. Okay.
Just more fence.
Okay.
And that's it for now.
Okay, so I am going to show you what this image is. So again, if you can't see depth, and this is kind of how your world looks. It's kind of flat. There's no real visual cues to tell you what's happening in the world. So it's pretty difficult, pretty easy to see how you might not get everything that's going on. So this is actually a cow. And you can see the line around. We've got some ears here. We've got an eye. We go down here and there's the nose. And then this is the back end of the cow, and this is part of the neck. So this is a cow. Once you see some element of its structure. But again, if you have a visual processing deficit, all you see is the blank screen. And none of the cues that tell you what else it could be. So again, I'm going to leave the attention one to you. I've got lots I can talk on, so I do recommend you have a go at these, and I'll put it at the end. But so having a learning disability is incredibly difficult for everybody, and it's a lifetime disability. It's not going to go away. Nobody wakes up one morning and suddenly doesn't have a disability anymore. Just like if you had a difficulty with seeing, you're not suddenly going to wake up tomorrow and it's all going to be fixed. So we have to support our children. And we do that through advocacy, which is being involved in somebody else's life and helping them secure their rights. And it's really important that we learn as parents how to advocate effectively for our children, and we model it for our children. At some point, we hope that our children are going to be independent from us, depending on the level of the disability. What that may or may not be the case, but we hope that at some point our children will be living independently and will be working and maybe raising their own families. And in order to do that, they're going to have advocated for themselves at some point. As parents, we cannot do it all. So one of the most important things we have to do is teach them how to advocate. And the place that we find most of the advocacy going on at this stage, or the stage of a student's life, is at school. And one of the things that I would stress most highly is that it is really important to try and create a collaborative approach with your school. May be very challenging at times, and you may feel like you're banging your head against a brick wall, but you need to persevere in order to get the best for your child. So all the way through, we're trying to keep focused on the needs of the student, the child itself. Doesn't matter who's right or wrong, it's what is right, what is the best solution for the child. And so in order to do that, we need to share whatever information that we have that's accurate and complete. So if they've been for a new assessment, we need to share it. If we're having difficulties at home, we need to share that. If we're having successes at home, we share that too, okay? It's important to recognize that the school staff see a different side of our child. So we see them for a certain amount of time, and we see them probably at their most relaxed, where they can let loose and they can sometimes be mean and they can sometimes be joyful. But the persona that they have at school is different, and also that the teacher is looking at different skills that the child has than us. So we have to recognize that they bring a unique perspective to any discussion that we have. So we need to be open-minded at what they're telling us, and not just think that we know best, but try and take that information, process it with what other information you have, and determine which information you want to use in your route forward. I'm not saying that you have to accept whatever the school says. I'm just saying you take it as a point of reference for a discussion. And then we work for a solution based on the needs of the child. And in order for children with learning disabilities to be successful, they need to receive specific skill instruction. So a child with a learning disability, if they are never given specific direct instruction, will never learn to overcome their learning disability. So if we don't teach them to read, they will never be able to read. Okay, it's not going to come by osmosis. They're not suddenly going to get it. With a learning disability, you know, for other children, maybe if you leave them long enough, they're going to pick up reading. With a child with a learning disability, that is not the case. Okay, there are plenty of adults out there, very successful adults, but plenty of adults out there that I know with grade 3 reading. Okay, because that's as far as they've got. Okay, it's not going to suddenly miraculously get to, I don't know, grade 12 reading just because they happen to go to university and become a doctor or a professional. So we need to give them skill instruction, and that also includes things like social skills. Anything that we pick up automatically, children with learning disabilities don't. So we need to give them specific instruction in all areas where they're struggling. We also need to teach them strategies to help them overcome their learning disability. We need to teach them how to advocate for themselves, and we need to make sure that they have accommodations in place at the school system. And so I just want to reinforce the reason we use the word disability, because it can be a frightening word, is that with it comes a lot of power and a lot of legal rights. So under the Ontario Human Rights Code, for people with disabilities, they must be accommodated to the point of undue hardship. And for a school board, it is almost impossible for them to argue that they have tried to accommodate a child to the level of undue hardship. Okay, it just doesn't happen. So basically they have to support the child. And in the Education Act, all school boards have to provide special education programs and services for all exceptional students, including those with learning disabilities. And there are specific policy documents related to learning disabilities. And then I've just got two mission statements from our local school boards. Halton District, our schools will work in partnership with students, families, and community to meet the educational needs of every student. And Halton Catholic, the goal is to ensure that all students achieve success. So as an organization, we hold them to their mission statements. Okay, we go in and we advocate at times directly on behalf of the family to make sure that they meet the educational needs of every student, and so that all students can achieve success. So if we don't believe that sufficient accommodations are being put in place, then we can support you in making sure that that happens. So what needs to happen in the school system? We need to make sure our teachers are properly trained, and there's a lot of discussion. The Ontario Human Rights Commission just did a Right to Read inquiry, and they will be launching their results very shortly. And basically, my understanding is that they are going to say that teachers are not adequately trained to support students with special education needs and to support children in learning to read, particularly those with learning disabilities. And so there's going to be a bit of a shakeup coming about how teachers are trained and the school boards work in order to be able to teach our kids to read. Our children need to have special skill instruction, so they need one-on-one support, small group support. They need to be taught to read. They need to be taught to do math if they struggle with math. They need to be taught social skills if they struggle with those, and not just assume that it's going to come eventually. Accommodations need to be put in place, and we're going to talk about accommodations and not modifications. And then we need to have direct communication with parents through individual education plans and assignment of identifications through an IPRC. And then we also need mental health support for our students. So the main source of support that you will get from a school is in an individualized education plan. So any child at all who is struggling at school is entitled to receive an individualized education plan. Okay, you don't have to be diagnosed with a learning disability to get one. You don't have to be diagnosed with any disability. You just need to be struggling. Okay, and it's designed to formalize what needs to take place in order to support that child and make them be successful, because as we've mentioned in the mission statement, the school boards have undertaken to make sure that every child achieves success. So the IEP is put in place. In this document, it goes further, though, for students with learning disabilities, that we talk about what additional supports, accommodations, any special education programs or services that need to be provided, and that's all included too. So how do you get an IEP? And this is talking about a school-based IEP. You can see that at the bottom of this chart is a school-based IEP or an informal IEP. And this can happen in two ways. First of all, the school may identify that there's a problem, or you may identify there's a problem. Somebody notices that the child is struggling, and they call everybody together, and the teachers and the special education team and the parents meet, and they discuss the fact that your child is struggling. And they may decide that assessments need to be made. So you may have gone out and got some private assessments, or they may decide that we need to have some school-based assessments. That could be classroom reading, it could be a psych ed done by the school, it could be occupational therapy, whatever assessment it needs to be done to determine whether the child has some level of struggle that is more significant than just a regular don't quite get it yet. When all those documents are pulled together, we then have what we call a school resource team meeting. And that can be with some other people from the board. It can be consultants, psychologists, principals will be there, maybe a child and youth worker, occupational therapist, different people that the board feels need to be there to help determine what supports need to be put in place for this child. And then coming out of that meeting, there will be developed an IEP, an individualized education plan. And in that plan, there's going to be a list of the child's strengths, their weaknesses or their areas of need, what we're trying to help them with, what they're struggling with. And then there's going to be a list of accommodations that we're going to put in place to help the child be successful. So it could be that, I'm going to take an example, your child is struggling to read, so we're going to pull them out of class once a week and they're going to do a small group literacy program, and we're going to have them read with a volunteer whenever they're available, and they have to do writing, they don't have to write as much, they might get some extra time. And there are lots and lots of accommodations that can be used. Depending on the age of the child, it might be some assistive technology needs to be thrown in there. It might be that they're going to work on a program like RAS Kids, or a different program that's used to motivate them with their reading. And that's just, as I say, with their reading. If, for example, they have ADHD, they don't have a learning disability, but they have ADHD, child might need attention breaks, they might need to sit closer to the teacher, they might need to have movement breaks, or redirection when they're losing focus. A whole different range of accommodations that can be put in place. The school goes about this, has to be done with the approval of the parents. Okay, and with the involvement of the parents, and it's supposed to be with the classroom teacher as well. In this, we always have to remember that a child with a learning disability has average to above average intelligence. Okay, so I just want to remind you that, because the absolute critical thing is that we use accommodations. Okay, accommodations are strategies or tools that we're going to use that do not alter the expectations of the curriculum. So if your child is in grade 3 and is struggling and some accommodations are put in place, they will still do grade 3. They will still do the grade 3 work. They may not have to do, you know, if they've got, I don't know, say they struggle with math, and there may be an accommodation in there that the child just has to do, rather than doing 20 questions every night for homework, the child has to only do 5 if they get 5 right. So as soon as they get 5 in a row right, they've shown that they know what they're doing, and then they can stop. Okay, and that's called learning to mastery. They're doing the same questions that the other child did, they just don't have to do as many, because doing 20 questions when it takes longer is more work and is not really showing their knowledge anymore. The problem when you get into modifications, which is the other type of programming that can be given, is that a modification is a change in the grade level expectation. So this is usually something we would only recommend as an absolute last choice, when they've tried every single accommodation listed in the ministry guidelines and none of them have worked. And the reason for that is, if you change the grade level expectation, so your child in grade 3 is doing struggling with maths and is probably at a grade 1 level, and we now say, okay, that's fine, they're only going to do grade 1 level maths this year, okay, in grade 3. So next year in grade 4, are they going to do grade 2? At what point do they get back to their grade level? Because we already know they're of average to gifted intelligence. And the problem is, if they don't get back to grade level work by the time they go to high school, they're going to be in the locally developed programs. And those programs do not allow a child to go to university or college. So we have to get them back onto a grade level working. Okay, so if the course has to be modified for some reason, and sometimes it has to be for a mental health reason, there has to be a plan to get them back to grade level. Because if a child is modified, they generally stay modified, and then their opportunities for the future are stopped there and then. Okay, there is generally no plan to get them back to where they need to be successful. So if you see an IEP where your child is on a modification, you need to have a discussion with the school board about what is the plan to get them back to a grade level working and back to accommodations. So that's talking about the programming. And I'm going to just stop there for a moment because we do have a little bit of time. And I'm just going to ask if there are any questions so far. Just wanted to make sure. I know that some of that stuff gets a bit heavy. So if anybody's got any questions about IEPs, accommodations versus modifications, we can deal with those now.
So I have a question for you.
Yep.
And I always say the chat verbatim. Are you saying that if our child has an MID, we are not able to use LDAHH?
We are a charity for children with learning disabilities. Our programming is designed for students with learning disabilities. And so it depends on the program. So some of our programs are clearly for students with learning disabilities rather than MID. In some programs, at the discretion of the facilitator, it may be that program could be of benefit to a student with MID. So I'm thinking, say, of social skills programming might be a fit. Our reading programs, so certainly we'll go into some of our programming here, but the Orton-Gillingham reading program would not be a fit. That's a very intense program and is designed and evidence-based only for students with learning disabilities. There's no evidence that it provides additional benefit for a child with MID. And as an organization, one, that doesn't fit into our charitable mandate, and two, I wouldn't want to take your money if I can't have if I don't have some evidence that it would actually work. So some of them like may be useful, but again, it would depend on a case-by-case basis.
So we have several questions, and I'm just going to go through them here. So just going back to what you just mentioned, one of the questions is, what is an MID?
Oh, sorry, my apologies. An MID is a mild intellectual disability.
Okay.
And so it's generally, you know, the bell curve. We're looking at an intelligence level, you know, slightly below average. And so it just makes it a little bit more challenging for the child to grasp some of those academic concepts that we're trying to teach in these specific programs.
Thank you so much, Allison. So our next question is, when is the IEP received? Usually we got grade 1 IEP, but not this year.
The IEPs generally come out middle to the end of October. I imagine they're a week late because school got started a week late. They'll be any moment now. And so you'll receive your IEP, and then they'll ask you to sign it. Okay, you can sign it. All that you're signing is that you received it. Okay, you're not signing that you agreed it, and all you're signing is that you have received it. You can scribble all over it, and that's what I do with mine when I get them. I make whatever changes I think need to be made. And I generally sit down with my children and do this. So my children are getting a bit older now, but from grades 5 or 6, I would sit down with them and I would go through, this is your IEP, this is what it says your strengths are. Do you think they're right? This is what you struggle with. Do you think that's right? This is what your interests are, and that's a really easy one for them to help with, you know, things like Lego and, you know, anything they're interested in. So that changes every time. And then we talk about what kind of accommodations do you want to have. So we might talk about, okay, do you need to take a break when you've been working for more than, I don't know, 30 minutes? Do you need a break or not now as you're getting a bit older? And we go through all the accommodations. One, so the child knows what they're entitled to. And two, so we make sure it's relevant, because one of the difficulties are that often there are so many accommodations on there that the teacher doesn't know what they are, can't keep track of them all. And so they end up not focusing on the most important things. So for me, it's really important that we keep the most important things, accommodations that we want on the IEP. So I would scribble up the IEP, put my changes wherever I want, and then I'd send it back with written, there's a big box there, and I say, please see my changes. Okay, that is now a formal document. They will now have to issue a new one with your changes in there. Now, if they've got any queries, they might arrange a meeting with you to discuss them. Again, I've been doing this, you know, I've built up a good rapport with my school, and so often what will happen is that they'll say, well, this is what we're thinking of sending out, or I'll, even before they get to IEP time, I'll say, well, this is last year's. I'll just mark up what I want to see this year, and I'll hand it to you, so that they put my changes in before we even start, to try and speed up some time. But basically, you should be getting your IEP any moment. Take a look at it, make sure it's got accommodations if your child has a learning disability, that it's not modified. And if it is going to be modified, then you need to have a very serious chat with your cert as to what is the reasoning behind that, and what is their plan to get your child back onto grade level. And then, yeah, you basically submit it, and you can change your IEP whenever you feel like it. Okay, so if something isn't working, I think it's 30 days. Every 30 days, you can say, I want to change something. We've tried that, it's not working. I don't want to have that anymore. I'd rather see this. You need to give them a bit of time to see, like particularly if they make suggestions, a bit of time for them to see if their ideas work. But if it's not working, then you can change it at any point in time. You don't have to wait for the next IEP to come out. And I think they come out twice a year, but you don't have to wait. You can change that IEP at any time you feel it needs to be changed. So if something happens in your child's life, like say they suddenly develop anxiety or something's happening, you can have new additions put into the IEP.
That is a phenomenal answer. I think some of that has answered some of our other questions, but I'm going to still ask the questions. You have about, I'm going to say 11 questions, and I'm just looking at the time, and I don't know how much more you'd like to share. So would you like me to fire them all off, or would you like me to go one by one?
So what we'll do is I'll maybe take 5 minutes of questions, and then we'll come back to them in the next session. So I can just give you a bit of an overview of what we have in case there's any programming you're particularly interested, but we will cover those questions at the start of the next session.
Perfect. Okay, so let's go with our next question, and I'm just going to go in order as received with, and you may have answered this in your previous answer. With IEP review, is it reasonable to expect contact with parents to include interaction, or is it typical that the document draft just be sent to the family via email? And this is for high school.
Yes, it's supposed to involve the parent. Okay, it's supposed to be a collaborative approach. Now, in COVID world, things are different. Often what happens, or generally what happens, is the CERT and the classroom teacher may get together. Often it's just the CERT, so the special ed teacher, and they write they basically copy what was in last year's, add any new assessments, and then they send it out to you, okay? That isn't what's supposed to happen. It's supposed to be a collaborative approach where you sit down and talk about any strengths and weaknesses and changes, and then you basically come up together with an IEP that works for your child. But generally that isn't what happens. Generally you will get sent home the IEP, and that's why you mark it up. Because you need to get across what you want to have happen. I mean, if it's perfect, great. You know, but if it's not, you let them know. You tell them what you want to see. And as soon as you've written it down, it's a legal document that's going into the OSR, and they have to deal with it.
That is so beautifully clarified, Allison. Thank you. How I wish I had this for my child back in the day. Not that I'm dating myself, but just wonderful information. It is a very, very taxing approach, and what is all involved. Our next question is, can toddlers get support? I'm assuming this is preschool.
Not really. So, I mean, there are early learning centers, and those will give support, and ROC can give support, and your doctor will tell you about developmental delays or anything like that where they're concerned. But you can start to identify whether there's some kind of risk of a learning disability in kindergarten if your child cannot rhyme. Okay, so it's one of the easiest ways. If your child doesn't grasp the concept of rhyme and the fact that bat rhymes with cat, rhymes with hat, it's telling you that they don't understand the sound of the words. And that is a key, phonological awareness is a key part of a learning disability. So that's for reading disabilities. The psych ed assessments are only accurate for learning disabilities after the age of about 7, because the brain is growing so much at the earlier ages that they may grow out of some of their problems. You may find that the ones that are very clear, you will know, and you will be looking for support earlier. With my daughter, I had her tested at 7, got a non-committal. I didn't get a full diagnosis of an LD, although they did suspect one. And I didn't get the diagnosis of an LD until she was 10. So it really depends on the diagnosis, but for a toddler, you're kind of looking at more community supports because the brain is growing very rapidly and things can change.
Thank you so much. Our next question is, if one child is older, say grade, and doing okay, is it too late for some of these programs? And
What a
that's
beautiful
grade 9. Sorry.
Yes, what a beautiful segue. Let's go into the segue of the programming, okay? So, what we have at Learning Disabilities Association is we run a number of different programs, and we've focused a lot on literacy, and we focus on literacy for younger students because early intervention is absolutely critical. So as soon as we see that there is a learning disability, usually around 6 or 7, we want to start intervening. So we have a program, our Orton-Gillingham program, which is kind of like the gold standard for treating or for remediating learning disabilities. And it's a multi-sensory program. So the child is, rather than just learning with the part of their brain that they struggle with, they learn with their hands, with their mouth. How do you shape sounds? What does that feel like when you make a different sound? So they learn, our tutors are extremely skilled, and that program can help bring children back to grade level from being 2 or 3 grade levels behind. It's an expensive program, and it generally takes 1 to 2 years of one-on-one tutoring twice a week, but that program is there. We have a Reading Rocks program, which is an early literacy intervention program for readers who are struggling from 6 to 12. And a lot of what this is, it works on phonics, sight words, fluency, but a lot of it is building motivation for reading. Okay, so we're trying to re-engage the student with what has been a difficult process for them, because the more that they read, the better they'll get at it if it's not a specific learning disability. We also have typing programs that are specifically designed for students with dyslexia. So again, a multisensory program deals with sounds and has been approved by the International Dyslexia Association. We also do assistive technology, and our assistive tech is actually different. It's more a writing-based course. So we teach students grades 4 to 6, and then 7 to 9, how to write using their assistive tech. Just as we learn how to write using a pencil or write using a pen, they learn how to write paragraphs, or they learn how to write, to research a topic, and their tool is their assistive tech. Kids are very good at using assistive tech, so it's not really a question of you need to press this button. It's a question of, okay, when we're writing, you're automatically going to use your voice to text, or you're automatically going to use your speech to voice, whatever, speech to text. It's getting them more familiar and comfortable with the technology that they're using. We have self-advocacy training where we teach students about their learning disabilities, what learning disabilities are, what their individual strengths and weaknesses are, learning strategies for school about how to overcome some of their difficulties and how to advocate for themselves, what their rights under the law are, and how to ask for support in a non-confrontational way. And then we do role playing with that, and that's a group program. And then it says here that it's in development, but our social skills program is now running. And we have 2 age groups. where we teach social skills. So we teach students how to work collaboratively, when it's appropriate to talk about certain subjects, when it's not, how you say hello, maintaining eye contact, a whole bunch of things that students with learning disabilities just don't understand. So those are some of the programs. We are in the process of launching a whole suite of programs for youth, so basically high school students. So I'm leading a homework habits group that will focus on developing strategies for how to actually do your homework. It's not about the content, it's about how to get yourself organized, how to break down your work so it's no longer overwhelming, how to cut down the distractions while you're actually working. So that's one area. We're launching a youth social drop-in so that kids can get together, or youth can get together with an activity going on, and they can connect with others who are similar to themselves, having struggles. And we are also launching a self-advocacy program for grade 11 and 12, which will focus more on transitioning into either the workforce or into post-secondary education. So those are some of the programs that are coming. In terms of the services that we offer a lot of support to parents. So we do telephone or in-person support. We've just put up on our website, you can book an appointment with us directly on the website. We have a live chat line that's open when office hours are open, so you can chat directly with our resource facilitators who are there. You can telephone, we can arrange Zoom meetings. We do workshops like this. We do crisis support where we will actually go in and do advocacy on behalf of a family. So we'll sit there in the school meetings, either IEP meetings, IPRC meetings, and advocate for the legal rights of the child to make sure that they get the accommodations that they need. We do lecture series. As I mentioned, we sit on the Special Education Advisory Committees, so we are monitoring very closely what is happening with COVID, our virtual schools, the in-person schools, not just from the COVID perspective, but what is happening for students with learning disabilities. What supports are still in place, what have been removed, how quickly are they all going to get back. We then have an educators conference in March of each year, and this year we're going to have it virtually. We have some amazing speakers already lined up. I don't know if you've heard of Ross Green, but he's a wonderful speaker in terms of collaborative problem solving for children. We have people talking about how LDs affect the brain and how it's really is a brain disorder and needs to be thought about that by teachers, as well as strategies, anti-bullying strategies, a whole range of topics that will be covered there. So we do community awareness and workshops for other groups, and we also offer volunteer opportunities for parents, co-op students, teacher candidates to get involved with our organization and give back if they're able to. So those are the supports. As I say, they range from children to youth to parents. Our next phase after that will be to launch some adult programs. With the COVID crisis, we've actually expanded our programs dramatically. We are seeing up to a 4-fold increase in demand for services. Our reading program last year, our Reading Rocks program, had 20 students in it. We have 72 running, 72 students being taught in this session, all virtually. So, and that's a one-on-one program. So 4-fold increase, we're seeing the same kind of increase in parent support because the schools don't have the capacity to deal with the crisis that we have for our students at the moment. And so we are stepping up and we want to be there for you and your children. I think that is the end of my time. It is LD Awareness Month. The Learning Disabilities Association of Halton-Hamilton is a charity. It is not funded by the government. We run on donations, we run on fees for our programs, and we run through certain grants for specific programs, such as some of the COVID funding that was available to help vulnerable students. But we rely on corporate donations and engaging the community to support our work. The majority of our staff are volunteers, and we are so thankful for everything that they do. So, thank you very much, Maria Rosa, for inviting me.
Oh, thank you, Allison. This was an extremely beneficial presentation. I'm sure I speak for everyone who's here and for everyone who will be able to view this later as a recording. I'm just pulling up here. I'm going to give it over to Christina before everybody leaves, so take it away.
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you all again for joining us tonight. A huge thank you to our presenter, Allison. Such an insightful presentation. We will be posting the presentation and the recorded workshop as a resource on our website, Halton Family for Families. We also invite you back for part 2, Monday, November 2nd at 6:45 p.m. to continue this conversation and have an opportunity for more questions. Your opinion is very important to us as we try to provide you with the best workshop experience. So please take a few minutes to complete our survey before you leave us. Also, please stay tuned as we present more informative workshops. Also, be sure to check out our wellness drop-in program, Everything But the Kitchen Sink, a safe space to explore and share different and fun wellness activities. Or please join us for Our Space, a Facebook Live event with Stephen Pathello, a show that introduces the world of mental health to children in a delicate and playful manner, using puppets who are just like him and you. For more information, head to our website. Thank you again, Allison.
You're very welcome.
Thank you once again to our families and community for attending, and to Christina for facilitating. At this time, we will say goodnight, be well, and stay safe. Feel free to disconnect at this time, and we hope to Zoom with you all soon. Our survey link was in the chat, but I will be following up with you via email as well. Have a good night, everyone, and thank you for attending.